A group of widows stands frozen in the ruins of their homes, staring at something impossible. A black American soldier, 6 feet tall in an olive uniform, is walking toward her holding bread. Then he speaks words they never expected to hear. "Good morning, ma'ams," in perfect Dutch. Everything the Nazis told her was a lie. This is November 1944, and the angel from Hell's Highway has just arrived in Arnhem. The city is dead but still breathing. 17,000 souls lost when Operation Market Garden collapsed 2 months earlier. Homes split open like broken eggs, walls standing without roofs, windows gaping without glass. Anna Vermeer is 32 but looks 50. Her husband died on the second day of fighting, crushed under debris, when British paratroopers and German tanks turned their street into a battlefield. Now she lives in 3 rooms of what used to be a 7-room house, sharing space with November cold that seeps through walls like water through cloth. Her 3 children wake crying every morning. Hunger is no longer a feeling, it's a constant companion. 4-year-old Peter has stopped asking for food. 7-year-old Margarita counts ceiling cracks to distract herself from stomach pain. 9-year-old Jacob, the oldest, watches his mother with ancient eyes that understand they might not survive winter. The ration is 400 calories per person per day. A human body needs 2,000 to function. Mathematics becomes prophecy. In 6 months, 22,000 Dutch civilians will be dead from starvation. Anna does the arithmetic in her head every night and knows her family is included in that number. Hell's Highway is what soldiers call the road. Route 69 from Eindhoven north through Veghel, Uden, Grave, and into Arnhem. The only supply line the Allies managed to hold after Market Garden fell apart. Every truck that comes up that road carries life or death in its cargo bed. The convoys started arriving in October, irregular at first, then more frequent as Allied command realized the Dutch population was dying. GMC trucks painted olive drab with red bumpers to mark them as priority transport. The Red Ball Express stretched from its original French roots into the Netherlands because someone in logistics understood that liberation means nothing to corpses. Anna hears the engine before dawn, a low rumble that grows louder, echoing off broken buildings. She moves to what used to be her front door, now just an opening with a torn blanket hung across it. The truck appears through morning fog like a ship emerging from sea mist. Red bumper catches weak sunlight. The vehicle stops 50 meters away at the designated distribution point, a cleared section of street where 5 houses used to stand. The driver's door opens. A black man steps down, and Anna's heart stops. She has never seen a black person in her entire life. Arnhem before the war was as white as paper, as isolated as an island. The only black faces she ever saw were in Nazi propaganda posters. Posters that showed savage faces, exaggerated features, words screaming about racial science and the Negro menace. One poster still hangs partially torn on a wall across the street, showing a caricatured black soldier with the caption, "Bescherm Nederland tegen de Zwarte Pest," protect the Netherlands from the Black Plague. But the man walking toward her looks nothing like those posters. He is tall, yes, well over 6 feet. His uniform is clean and pressed despite the mud. His face is calm, kind even, with careful eyes that assess the ruins around him not with contempt, but with something that looks like sorrow. He carries 2 burlap sacks over his shoulder with ease, moving with the economy of someone who has done this many times. Then he speaks, and Anna's entire understanding of the world fractures. "Goedemorgen, mevrouw. Brood voor u en uw kinderen." Good morning, ma'am. Bread for you and your children. The Dutch flows naturally, not the halting speech of someone using a phrase book, but real fluent Dutch with a slight American accent underneath. Anna cannot move. Her mouth opens, but no sound comes. Her children press against her legs, feeling her shock transmit through her body. The soldier, seeing her paralysis, sets the sacks down gently and steps back, hands visible, non-threatening. He speaks again, this time in English. "I'm Sergeant James Carter, United States Army, 666 Quartermaster Truck Company. We're here to deliver supplies. You're safe." Jacob, the 9-year-old, finds his voice first. "Mama, hij spreekt Nederlands." "Mama." He speaks Dutch. The words break Anna's paralysis. She takes one step forward, then another. Her voice comes out as a whisper. "How do you speak my language?" Carter smiles, a gentle expression that transforms his face. "Ik heb Nederlands geleerd van een vriend in België. Een dominee die vluchtelingen hielp. I learned Dutch from a friend in Belgium, a minister who helped refugees. The explanation is simple, but revolutionary. Carter grew up in Chicago's South Side, attended a black college where he studied languages because his mother believed education was armor against oppression. When war came and he was drafted into a segregated transportation unit, the Army discovered his language skills and sent him to a 2-week crash course in basic Dutch. He practiced with Belgian refugees while his unit was stationed near Brussels. He learned because he believed in being useful, in connecting with people his truck served. But Anna knows none of this context yet. All she knows is that a black man speaks her language, carries bread for her children, and stands with patient dignity while she processes impossible information. Carter opens one sack and pulls out items, naming them in Dutch. Brood, melkpoeder, blikkenvlees, chocolate voor de kinderen, bread, powdered milk, canned meat, chocolate for the children. At the word chocolate, Peter, the 4-year-old, peers around his mother's skirt. Carter crouches down slowly, making himself smaller, less intimidating. He produces a Hershey's bar from his jacket pocket, his personal ration that he was saving for himself. He holds it out toward Peter, speaking softly. Voor jou, kleine man. For you, little man. Peter looks up at Anna, seeking permission. She nods, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness but from the collision of starvation, gratitude, shame, and cognitive dissonance. Peter takes 3 steps forward and accepts the chocolate with both hands like it's a holy relic. The transaction breaks something in Anna. She falls to her knees on the broken cobblestones and weeps. Not delicate tears, but body-shaking sobs that come from months of holding everything together, from burying a husband without ceremony, from watching children waste away, from believing lies that told her some people were less than human. Carter doesn't touch her, doesn't move closer, just waits with the patience of someone who has seen this reaction before. When she finally looks up, he says in Dutch, "U bent niet alleen. We komen elke week terug. You are not alone." We will come back every week. Other widows are emerging now, drawn by the sound of the truck, moving like ghosts through rubble. Marta, 45, who lost her husband and 2 adult sons in the fighting. Elizabeth, 38, a schoolteacher whose husband was executed by the SS for hiding a Jewish family. Johanna, 23, so malnourished that her baby died stillborn in October. They approach with the same mixture of desperation and uncertainty that Anna showed. 2 more soldiers have climbed down from the truck. Private Jackson, shorter and stockier than Carter, with a Georgia accent even in his Dutch. Corporal Washington, quiet and methodical, who begins organizing supply distribution without being asked. The widows form a line without being told, years of rationing and occupation having taught them the protocol of scarcity. Carter and his men work efficiently. Each family receives flour, canned goods, powdered milk measured carefully from large containers, Red Cross parcels with medicine and bandages, letters from relatives who fled to England or America. Each transaction includes a moment of eye contact, a word of greeting, a small gesture of humanity that costs nothing but means everything. Marta is the last in line. She's the one who still mutters Nazi slogans, who still believes in racial hierarchy even as her stomach caves inward. She approaches Carter with visible reluctance, her body language broadcasting disgust. She holds out her hands for supplies without speaking, without meeting his eyes. Carter loads her arms with goods and then does something unexpected. He notices the door to her half-ruined house is hanging by one hinge, creating a gap that lets cold air pour into her home. Without asking permission, he walks over, lifts the door with one hand and settles it back into place properly, using a piece of broken brick to wedge it secure. The entire operation takes 30 seconds. Marta stares at the fixed door, then at Carter, then back at the door. Her mouth works, but no sound emerges. Carter just nods politely and returns to the truck. That night, Marta tells her neighbor that perhaps the Negro soldiers are not what the posters said. It's a small crack in a lifetime of conditioning, but cracks are where light enters. Elizabeth, the teacher, lingers after receiving her supplies. She speaks to Carter in careful English, apologizing for her accent. She asks where he learned Dutch, what he did before the war, whether he has family. Carter answers patiently. He was a teacher, too, in a segregated school in Chicago where black children received cast-off textbooks with pages missing and chapters outdated. He taught English and history to kids who faced the same racism their grandparents faced, in a country that claimed to be free. Elizabeth listens and something shifts in her understanding. She asks a question that reveals her awakening. If they lied about you, what else did they lie about? Carter's answer is simple but devastating. Everything. They lied about everything. That's how propaganda works. You tell people that others are less human, so when you commit atrocities, it feels justified. You told yourselves we were savages so you wouldn't question why we couldn't vote, why we went to different schools, why we were only good enough to drive trucks. And the Nazis told you the same lies so you wouldn't question why Jewish families disappeared, why resistance fighters were shot, why your country was worth destroying. The words hang in the cold November air. Elizabeth nods slowly, her teacher's mind already working through implications. She asks if she can write letters to Carter's family in America, if she can help her students practice English with him and his men when they visit. Carter agrees. The war is not over, supply runs are dangerous, and he might die tomorrow. But today, in this moment, education continues, connection continues, humanity continues. The truck departs an hour after arriving. The widows watch it roll back down Hell's Highway toward Allied lines, toward the depot where Carter and his men will reload and drive 16 more hours to reach another desperate village. The Red Ball Express operates in continuous loops. Drivers sleep in their trucks, eat cold rations, urinate in bottles to save time. They drive under blackout conditions at night, navigating by feel and memory. They face German ambushes, road mines, artillery strikes. The mortality rate is classified, but everyone knows it's high. Anna stands in her damaged doorway, watching the truck disappear. Jakob stands beside her, holding the empty burlap sacks that will become blankets. Margarita clutches a can of meat like treasure. Peter has chocolate smeared across his face, the first sugar he's tasted in months. Anna looks at the Nazi poster across the street, at the caricatured face that bears no resemblance to Sergeant James Carter. She walks across the street and tears it down, ripping it into pieces that scatter in the November wind. The weekly deliveries become routine, but routine is a miracle when each week means survival. Carter and his men return every 7 to 10 days, depending on road conditions and military operations. Each visit is essentially identical. Arrival at dawn, distribution of supplies, brief conversations, departure within 2 hours. But within that structure, relationships form. The children learn English words. Jackson teaches them to count in English. Washington, who rarely speaks, carves small wooden toys from scrap lumber during rest stops and gives them to kids. Carter continues his patient conversations in Dutch, never pushing, never preaching, just existing as living proof that propaganda is fiction. December arrives, and with it the full weight of hunger winter. The hunger winter. Nazi Germany has cut all food supplies to Western Netherlands in retaliation for a railway strike. It's calculated starvation as a weapon of war. Temperatures plunge below freezing and stay there. Families burn furniture because there's no coal. They eat tulip bulbs which have no nutritional value, but create the illusion of fullness. Children die in their sleep, their bodies simply shutting down from malnutrition. The death rate in Arnhem climbs to 50 or 60 children per week. Anna's children survive only because of the Red Ball Express, but the Express is under siege. The Battle of the Bulge begins in mid-December, Germany's last major offensive. Supply lines are attacked, trucks are ambushed, drivers are killed. The convoys that do get through face longer routes, worse roads, heavier enemy fire. In late December, Carter's truck is hit by shrapnel from German artillery. Metal fragments puncture the truck bed, destroy half the supplies, and embed in Carter's left arm. He wraps the wound with a torn shirt and keeps driving. He has a schedule to keep, people depending on him. Blood seeps through the makeshift bandage, but the truck doesn't stop. When he arrives in Arnhem, Anna sees the blood immediately. She insists on cleaning and properly bandaging the wound, using supplies from the previous delivery. Carter sits patiently in her ruined kitchen while she works, her hands shaking from both cold and emotion. She asks why he didn't stop for treatment. He explains that stopping means delay. Delay means missed deliveries. Missed deliveries mean dead children. It's simple mathematics with terrible stakes. The deliveries become less frequent, every 2 weeks, then every 3. Each gap is agony for the widows who have come to depend not just on supplies, but on the proof that the outside world remembers they exist. In January, An old widow named Sophia dies of pneumonia complicated by starvation. She's 56, but her body is so wasted that she looks 80. The funeral is attended by 30 people, all women and children, all skeletal, and by 2 American soldiers who had no official reason to be there. Carter and Jackson come on their day off, hitchhiking from the depot in a British supply truck, risking court-martial for fraternization with civilians. They stand in the back of the small Reformed church, while a Dutch minister delivers the eulogy. The minister, looking at the 2 black soldiers in pressed uniforms, changes his prepared remarks. He says in Dutch that these men show what true Christian charity looks like, that they cross battlefields to feed strangers, that they risk death to deliver life, that their actions reveal the bankruptcy of Nazi racial ideology more powerfully than any sermon. After the service, a German patrol passes by the church. Young soldiers, teenagers mostly, retreating eastward as Allied forces advance. They see the black soldiers standing with Dutch widows. One German corporal, maybe 19 years old, stares with open confusion. His training told him that black soldiers were subhuman, that Americans used them as expendable cannon fodder, that they lacked intelligence and courage. But here they stand, voluntarily attending a funeral for a civilian they barely knew, showing more humanity than his own army showed in 4 years of occupation. The corporal's confusion is visible on his face. His worldview is cracking. Carter sees this and makes a decision. He addresses the young German in fluent German. Ich verstehe, was Sie dir beigebracht haben. Aber schau mit deinen eigenen Augen. Wer sind hier die Monster? I understand what they taught you, but look with your own eyes. Who are the monsters here? The German corporal has no answer. He looks at the funeral gathering, at the starving women and children, at the ruins his army created, at the black soldiers bringing food instead of violence. He turns away and rejoins his unit without speaking. That night, he will question things for the first time in his life. The questions will haunt him for decades. The winter deepens. February is the worst month. Food supplies and Allied depots are stretched to breaking. The Red Ball Express prioritizes frontline combat units because the war must be won before the peace can be maintained. Civilian deliveries are reduced to survival minimums. Carter's truck comes only once in February, carrying half the usual load. The widows divide everything with mathematical precision, making sure the children eat first. It's during this February visit that Carter tells Anna his story. They sit in her freezing kitchen, drinking ersatz coffee made from roasted chicory root that tastes like burned dirt, but provides warmth. Carter explains what he left behind in Chicago, a segregated city where black families were restricted to certain neighborhoods through legal covenants. Schools where black children received 1/3 the funding of white schools, restaurants where he couldn't eat, hotels where he couldn't sleep, jobs he couldn't apply for, all because of the color of his skin. He explains the central irony. In America, I cannot eat at the same lunch counter as white soldiers. I cannot drink from the same water fountain. I ride in the back of the bus. But here, in Europe, I drive through artillery fire to bring food to everyone. White Dutch, black American, it doesn't matter. We're all just people trying not to die. Anna listens with growing horror and understanding. She realizes that Carter faces oppression in his own country, that he is risking his life for a nation that doesn't fully recognize his humanity. She asks why he does it. Why fight for a country that treats you this way? Carter's answer is complex. Because the ideals are right even if the reality is wrong. Because black Americans have always had to prove our humanity through service. Because if we don't fight fascism abroad, the version at home gets stronger. Because I believe that actions change minds more than arguments do. He gestures around the ruined kitchen, at her children sleeping in the next room. You believed what the Nazis told you about people like me because you had no evidence to the contrary. But now you do. Now you've seen that a black man can speak your language, can be educated, can be kind, can be trusted. That experience will stay with you. You'll teach your children. They'll teach theirs. That's how change happens. One delivery at a time. One conversation at a time. One person choosing to see another person instead of a category. Anna understands. She promises to remember, to teach, to bear witness. She gives Carter a photograph of her family from before the war, when her husband was alive, when the children had round faces and clean clothes. She writes her name on the back along with an address that may not exist anymore. She asks for his address in America. He writes it carefully. 2314 South Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. An apartment above a grocery store in the Black Belt, the segregated section of the city. March arrives, and with it the final Allied offensive into Germany. The war is ending in slow motion. Nazi forces are collapsing but still fighting. The Red Ball Express routes shift eastward, following the advancing armies. Carter's unit receives orders to redeploy to Germany to supply the occupation forces. This means the end of deliveries to Arnhem. The Canadian First Army is moving up to take over the region, bringing their own supply systems. The final delivery happens on March 12th. The widows know it's the last one because Carter told Elizabeth last visit. They gather at the distribution point earlier than usual, not wanting to miss a moment. Carter and his crew arrive at dawn with a truck packed beyond regulation capacity. They've collected extra supplies from a dozen different sources, called in favors, requisitioned creatively, bent every rule short of theft. This last delivery includes chocolate, real coffee, cigarettes that can be traded for other goods, warm blankets, and letters that Carter personally carried from the mail depot. The distribution takes longer than usual because everyone wants to say goodbye. The children who Carter taught to count in English demonstrate their skills. Elizabeth presents him with a letter signed by 30 widows, thanking him and his men, promising to remember them, asking them to visit if they ever return. Marta, the woman who initially refused to accept help from a black soldier, gives Carter a small wooden cross that belonged to her dead husband. She says in broken English, "You are a good man. God protects good men." Carter's goodbye to Anna is private. They stand apart from the others near the ruins of what was once a bakery. Anna has prepared something to say, rehearsed it in her mind, but when the moment comes she can only weep. Carter speaks instead. "U bent geen vreemde meer. U bent familie. Schrijf me. Vertel me dat jullie overleefd hebben. You are no longer a stranger, you are family. Write to me. Tell me you survived." Anna nods, unable to speak. Carter hands her his address written on a piece of military-issue paper, along with instructions for sending mail through the Red Cross. He also gives her something else, his shoulder patch from his uniform, the insignia of the 666 Quartermaster Truck Company, a red ball with white wings. She clutches it like a sacred object. The truck pulls away for the last time. The widows stand watching until it disappears around a corner, heading south toward Hell's Highway, toward Belgium, toward Germany, toward whatever comes next. The war will officially end in 8 weeks. The hunger winter will end in 6 weeks when Allied forces fully liberate Western Netherlands and emergency food drops begin. But in this moment, on this March morning, the widows only know that their angels are leaving. April 14th, Canadian forces liberate Arnhem completely. Emergency food supplies flood in by truck, by plane, by every available means. The death toll of the hunger winter is counted. 22,000 Dutch civilians dead. Anna and her 3 children are not among them. They survived by margins measured in calories and weeks, kept alive by flour and canned meat, delivered by men who were told they were inferior. The reckoning begins. Dutch collaborators are arrested. Nazi propaganda is collected and destroyed or preserved as evidence. The widows of Arnhem tell their stories to Canadian soldiers, to journalists, to anyone who will listen. They talk about the black American drivers who saved them, who spoke their language, who proved that everything the Nazis said was a lie. Some listeners believe, others dismiss it as exaggeration or confusion. But the widows know what they experienced. Truth doesn't require universal belief to remain true. In September 1945, Anna writes her first letter to Carter. The mail system is still chaotic, but the Red Cross has established procedures for forwarding civilian correspondence to demobilized soldiers. She writes in careful English, translated from her Dutch with Elizabeth's help. She tells him that she and her children survived, that they are slowly rebuilding, that the house has a new roof and patched walls. She tells him that Jacob wants to be a teacher, that Margarita is back in school, that Peter barely remembers the war, but talks about the tall soldier who gave him chocolate. She asks if Carter made it home safely, if he is well, if he still teaches. She signs it, your Dutch sister, Anna Vermeer. The letter reaches Carter in November. He's back in Chicago, back in his segregated neighborhood, back teaching at a school where textbooks are 10 years out of date and the roof leaks when it rains. He's back in a country where he can be court-martialed for refusing a military order, but can't vote in several states, where he fought for freedom abroad, but doesn't fully possess it at home. He sits in his small apartment and reads Anna's letter 3 times, then writes a response. He tells her he's alive, teaching again, trying to readjust to civilian life. He tells her about the irony of returning to segregation after being treated with respect in Europe. He describes attending a movie theater and being told to sit in the balcony, the colored section, because he can't sit on the main floor with white patrons. He went to war, drove through artillery fire, saved lives, and came home to be told he's not good enough to watch a movie next to white Americans. He writes, "I fought for freedom. I still don't have it, but I don't regret going. Because I met people like you. Because I proved something that needed proving. Because every child I fed becomes a person who knows racism is a lie." The letters continue for years. Anna sends a photograph in 1946 showing her children holding a sign that says, "Thank you" in English. Carter sends pictures of his students, black children with bright faces and second-hand books. Anna writes about Dutch recovery, about rebuilding, about how she speaks at schools telling students about the war, about propaganda, about the black soldiers who saved her family. Carter writes about the civil rights movement beginning to stir in America, about black veterans demanding the rights they fought for, about slow, painful, costly progress. In 1968, Carter gives an interview to a black newspaper in Chicago as part of a series on World War II veterans. He's asked about his service, about driving the Red Ball Express, about what it meant. His answer becomes the headline. "We were good enough to die for America, but not good enough to eat at American lunch counters. We proved our humanity to the Nazis' victims. We came home and still had to prove it to our own neighbors." The interview is republished in a Dutch newspaper. Anna reads it. She's 56 now, a grandmother, active in peace movements and anti-racism education in the Netherlands. She writes to Carter proposing something bold. She wants to visit America. She wants to meet him in person, 38 years after they last saw each other. She has saved money, her children are grown. She wants to thank him face to face before time runs out. Carter's response is immediate. "Yes, please come. Please let me show you my city, my school, my life. Please let me introduce you to my family. They've heard about you for decades. They call you the Dutch widow who learned the truth. They want to meet the woman their father saved." In June 1983, Anna Vermeer flies to Chicago. It's her first time in an airplane, her first time in America. Carter meets her at O'Hare Airport, now 67 years old, gray-haired, retired from teaching. She's 71, white-haired, walking with a slight limp from wartime malnutrition that permanently damaged her bones. They recognize each other instantly. She walks toward him through the terminal. He walks toward her. They meet in the middle and embrace, 2 old people crying in the middle of a busy airport, while travelers flow around them like water around stones. Carter brings her to his neighborhood, shows her his school, introduces her to his children and grandchildren. She meets his wife, Dorothy, who thanks Anna for keeping her husband's spirit alive during dark years. Anna meets young black students who listen with wide eyes as she tells them about the war, about starvation, about propaganda, about the tall soldier who spoke Dutch and brought bread. She tells them something important. The Nazis taught us that some people are less than human. They taught us to fear difference, to hate the other, to believe that we were superior and others were inferior. But your father, your grandfather, he destroyed those lies just by being himself, by being educated, kind, brave, and human. He saved my life, but more than that, he saved my soul, because I was becoming the person the Nazis wanted me to be, and he showed me a different way. Carter takes Anna to his church, to his favorite restaurant, to Lake Michigan, where they sit on a bench and watch waves roll in. He tells her that her letters kept him going through hard years, that knowing he made a difference in her life made his own struggles bearable. She tells him that he changed not just her life but her children's lives, that Jakob became a teacher who teaches about the war honestly, that Margareta works for refugee organizations, that Peter, the little boy who got chocolate, became a translator who helps immigrants. On her last day in Chicago, Carter's family arranges a photograph. Anna and Carter stand together in his small backyard, arms around each other, both smiling through tears. His grandchildren take the picture with a new Polaroid camera. The photo shows an elderly white woman and an elderly black man, separated by background and history, united by shared humanity and mutual respect. Anna returns to the Netherlands carrying copies of that photograph. She gives one to Jacob, one to Margaretha, one to Peter. She keeps one for herself, framed on her dresser next to the photograph she gave Carter in 1945. When she dies in 1991 at 79, the photograph is buried with her. Her children tell the story at her funeral. The story of the angel from Hell's Highway, who proved that propaganda is powerless against personal encounter. Carter lives until 1996, dying at 80 in his sleep. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentions his military service, his teaching career, his civil rights activism. It doesn't mention Anna. But at his funeral, Dorothy reads from his letters. Letters that describe driving through artillery fire to feed strangers. Letters that explain why he kept teaching despite discrimination, why he kept fighting despite setbacks, why he kept believing despite evidence that change was impossibly slow. The reason appears again and again in his writing. Because I saw that people can change. Because a Dutch widow tore down Nazi propaganda after I gave her children bread. Because individual humans, meeting each other as humans, can defeat any ideology. The Red Ball Express transported 12.5 million tons of supplies across Europe between August 1944 and November 1945. The trucks drove over 6 million miles. The drivers, 75% of them black men serving in segregated units, kept Allied armies supplied despite discrimination, despite danger, despite exhaustion. They were mechanics, navigators, warriors without weapons, logistics experts who understood that wars are won not just by soldiers but by supply chains. But the most important thing those drivers delivered wasn't measured in tons or miles. It was truth. The simple, powerful, undeniable truth that racism is a lie, that humanity transcends melanin, that kindness has no color, that propaganda cannot survive sustained contact with reality. Dutch widows who had never seen black people before the war learned this truth from men like James Carter. They learned it not from speeches or books, but from direct experience, from bread delivered by a man who spoke their language, from chocolate given to a hungry child, from a door repaired without being asked, from a funeral attended by strangers who became family. That truth, once learned, cannot be unlearned. Anna Vermeer taught it to her children, who taught it to theirs. Carter taught it to his students, who carried it forward. Elizabeth taught it in her classroom for 30 years after the war ended. Marta, the woman who believed Nazi propaganda longest, spent her final years speaking against racism, using her own transformation as testimony. The ripples spread outward in ways that cannot be measured but are nonetheless real. History remembers the big moments, the invasions, the battles, the treaties, the victories. But history is also built from small moments. A soldier speaking Dutch to a widow, a child receiving chocolate, a door repaired, a letter exchanged, a photograph taken. These moments accumulate into movements. They prove that change happens not through grand gestures, but through accumulated small acts of humanity that refuse to recognize artificial divisions. Sergeant James Carter of the 666 Quartermaster Truck Company was not exceptional. Thousands of black drivers did what he did. They drove the trucks, delivered the supplies, spoke to civilians, proved through action that racist ideology was fiction. Most of their names are lost to history, their individual stories unrecorded, but their collective impact resonates across decades. They fed the hungry. They comforted the grieving. They demonstrated through example that humanity cannot be segregated. Anna Vermeer was not exceptional either. Thousands of Dutch women survived the hunger winter. Thousands learned similar lessons. Thousands had their worldviews shattered by encountering the humanity of people they'd been taught to fear. Most of their names are also lost, their individual transformations unrecorded. But their collective awakening helped create a post-war Netherlands more willing to question its colonial attitudes, more open to racial equality, more resistant to fascist ideology. The lesson is not that one soldier or one widow changed the world. The lesson is that countless soldiers and countless widows, meeting each other as humans rather than categories, created change through accumulation. Each interaction was a crack in the structure of racism. Enough cracks and the structure collapses. Today, the Red Ball Express is mostly forgotten, a footnote in World War II history, mentioned briefly in comprehensive texts, ignored in popular memory. The drivers who kept armies supplied, who prevented mass starvation, who literally saved Europe by driving trucks under fire, receive minimal recognition. This is not accidental. Their story complicates the narrative. It forces acknowledgement that America fought fascism abroad while practicing apartheid at home. It reveals that Black Americans proved their worth repeatedly and were still denied basic rights. It demonstrates that racism is maintained through deliberate effort and propaganda, not through natural order. But the story survives in fragments, in letters preserved in archives, in interviews recorded before veterans died, in family memories passed down through generations, in photographs of an elderly Dutch woman embracing an elderly Black man in a Chicago backyard, in school lessons taught by teachers who learned from teachers who met a soldier on Hell's Highway. The angel from the sky was not an angel. He was a man. A Black American man from Chicago's South Side who studied languages in college, taught in segregated schools, got drafted into a segregated army, drove a truck across a battlefield, spoke Dutch to a widow, and proved through simple human decency that everything the Nazis said was a lie. He did his job, survived the war, returned to discrimination, kept teaching, kept writing letters, kept believing that people could change because he had seen them change. Anna Vermeer was not transformed in an instant. Her awakening took time, took repeated encounters, took conscious effort to unlearn conditioning, but she did the work. She questioned what she'd been taught. She chose evidence over ideology. She recognized that if she was wrong about Black Americans, she might be wrong about other things too. That recognition became the foundation for a lifetime of anti-racism work. Their story is not unique, but it is real. It happened in November 1944 in the ruins of Arnhem. It happened again every week for 5 months. It continued through letters for decades. It concluded with an embrace in an airport and a photograph in a backyard. Matters not because they were exceptional, but because they were representative. Because thousands of similar stories occurred wherever Black American soldiers encountered European civilians who had been taught to fear them. The propaganda promised monsters. Reality delivered human beings. That gap between promise and reality created space for transformation. Not universal transformation. Prejudice proved remarkably durable, but enough transformation to matter. Enough to prove that racism requires constant maintenance, constant reinforcement, constant lies. And that truth, delivered one bread loaf at a time, can overcome lies delivered by an entire propaganda apparatus. This is the legacy of the Red Ball Express that history often misses. Yes, they transported supplies. Yes, they enabled military victory, but they also transported something more valuable and less tangible. They transported proof of common humanity. They delivered evidence that ideology is weaker than experience. They showed that meeting someone face to face, speaking their language, feeding their children, attending their funerals, creates bonds stronger than propaganda can break. Angel from the sky. That's what some Dutch children called the drivers. Not because they descended from heaven, but because they appeared when hope was gone, bringing life when death seemed certain, speaking familiar words with unfamiliar accents, proving that salvation can arrive in unexpected forms. The angels drove GMC trucks with red bumpers. They spoke Dutch with Chicago accents. They gave chocolate to starving children. They repaired doors without being asked. They returned week after week until the war ended and the deliveries stopped. And when they left behind something permanent. Not just the food that sustained bodies, but the memories that sustained souls. The undeniable proof that people can change, that prejudice can be overcome, that humanity transcends the categories we create to divide ourselves. Sergeant James Carter left behind a widow who tore down Nazi posters and taught her children the truth. Anna Vermeer left behind a soldier who kept believing in progress despite living under oppression. Both left behind descendants who carry forward the lesson they learned on a broken street in Arnhem in November 1944. The lesson is simple but profound. Racism is learned and therefore can be unlearned. Propaganda works through distance and fails through contact. Humanity is not a category. It's a recognition that occurs when we see each other as individuals rather than representatives. And that recognition, once achieved, becomes the foundation for change that echoes across generations. This is what happened when Dutch widows saw a tall black driver speaking Dutch. This is the story history often forgets, but memory preserves. This is the truth that was delivered along with bread on Hell's Highway in the winter of 1944. This story survived 70 years because people chose to remember. Now it's your turn. If this moved you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling us what hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. These stories matter. Your engagement keeps them alive. See you in the next one.